Welcome to 52 Authors, 52 Weeks, Season 3. I'm Dr. Lisa L. Campbell, the Growth Motivator. Each week, I sit down with a different author to explore what lies behind the pages. Growth, purpose, finding your voice. Enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another amazing episode of 52 Authors, 52 Weeks with me, Dr. Lisa L. Campbell, the Growth Motivator. And today I'm visiting the Massachusetts area with author Áine Greaney, whose book is, let me make sure we can see it, Trespassers. Oh gosh, the little light. There we go. Trespassers. And Anya, do you have a copy that you can hold up?
I do actually. Here it
Yeah,
is.
that's
Oh,
better.
more light there.
Yes, it's the light. It's the
It's the
light that
light,
we're trying
yeah.
to balance our face out. But the book is titled Trespassers and Other Stories. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. I'm really excited to be here.
So, Anya, why don't you tell our listening, viewing audience about you, your background, and then we'll talk a little bit about the book. We don't want to tell them everything about the book because we want them to actually get a copy. But let's just start with about your background.
Great. Well, as you said, I live here in Massachusetts where it's really wet and windy today. Just coming to my little office, I got little sparkles of rain, but I live here and I'm a writer, and then I also lead writing workshops. I kind of have three lives: writer, fiction, and nonfiction. I'm a teacher, I'm a trained teacher, and then I'm also certified in leading workshops in writing for wellness, which is where writing can help us to kind of cope better with our personal lives and our professional lives, or an incident in our lives, such as bereavement or whatever. And then my day job is in healthcare. So there's a nice crossover there between illness narratives, which I've written, and my creative or writing life. So it's kind of a three-pronged life. Lucky me. I'm originally from Ireland, which you can probably hear. I've lived here a long time, though. And I grew up in a pretty remote farm, in a very rural area. But I was always an avid kiddie reader. They were authors that I thought I knew them personally, because those authors flew across the Irish Sea to visit a farm and to visit with me in my little brain. And I think I always wanted to tell stories. I come from a strong storytelling background, and it was a multi-generational household. We lived with our grandparents, and my grandfather was a skilled storyteller, as was my dad. My dad was bilingual, so he could tell stories. He'd chip-chop back and forth. And I always wanted to be a writer, but I thought that's a ridiculous dream. And I never did write or publish anything till I moved to the US in the late 1980s. And even then, like many of us at that age, you're patching together these jobs. You're this, you're that, But at night, I do remember I would come home and make some time to write. Even, I'd still stink of French fries, So I had my first story published when I started graduate school. I went to graduate school here in the US, and when the magazine sent me, back then it would have been, US mail acceptance letter. And I remember taking that letter out of the mailbox, and thinking, oh, they've misdirected this. This went to the wrong address. It can't possibly be somebody publishing my short story. So it was, though. It was for real. And it kind of took off from there, slowly, but it did take off. So I feel very privileged to be a writer, like in the kind of hustle, to use, it's a wrong word to use, but I see it out there about writing and the book trade. I think we need to step back and look at the privilege of it, the privilege of literacy and the privilege of being able to tell a story and the privilege of having the leisure time to write, which many people don't have. So um, mostly it's been a happy story. You know.
Yes. I love that you finally realized that being a writer was embedded in your DNA and you were fighting it because you didn't think that you were good enough to do it when all alone you were born with the skills. You just
Probably.
needed to cultivate them, which is what I think many of us do. We have this um, version of ourselves that we kind of evolve into. And those of us who allow our true gifts to tug at us and actually, step into them, that's to me where the magic really happens in life when you allow yourself to be who you're supposed to be and become comfortable being uncomfortable. It's a scary place, but it's
Yeah.
also it's an amazing place to be as well.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about Trespassers. So it's really this collection of stories. I'm always amazed at authors who can write stories with characters. I am more of the self-help author. But I said, you know what? I have a very vivid imagination, so I probably could put together some characters. But anyway, back to Trespasser. So it's this collection of stories that kind of move back and forward from um, coastal Massachusetts to a rural area, exploring what happens when people return. Sometimes they return because they want to return, some return because something there is pulling them back. But I think the true essence is about these boundaries that are being crossed, right? So past, present, the parent, the child. How did you even come up with this concept?
Well, it would happen. Like the origin story happened during the pandemic. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and another historic moment was me cleaning the house. That's historic, especially cleaning my very dusty and very overstuffed and disorganized bookshelves. And in this stuffy disorganization, I came across some of those literary journals that had published my standalone stories, and I started reading through them. And of course, I don't know if you do this too, Lisa. Like you start saying, "Oh, look at that. I should have, that sentence should be shorter," or "Oh, look at that. There should be a comma there." Well, I started doing that. And then as I read through them, I said, there's a recurring theme here. All of these characters feel displaced. They're all in the wrong place. And then I said, well, what about the stories in my laptop that aren't finished yet? They're sitting there collecting more dust. And I thought, oh, this is weird. Every single story here is about a person not feeling comfortable, not just in a geographic spot, but I love that quote from the author Josephine Hart, that we all have a geography of the soul. Um, and once I thought about that and the concept of a geography of the soul and also the geography of coastal America versus rural Ireland, I thought that's what all these stories are about. And I don't know why, because I wrote them apart at different times in my life and published them in different journals. But that's definitely, I thought, the recurring theme. And then I thought I should pull these together, finish the unfinished ones, clean up and edit the finished ones, and put a book out there about mainly women just being in the wrong either geographic place or the wrong, psychic place or emotional place. And fortunately for me, it kind of came together as being about place, you know.
It's funny you mentioned that because it's really about, to me it was this emotional journey of the characters and
Mhm.
the place that was essentially home. Um, do you think a lot of us are on emotional journeys about um, being displaced and returning? Do you think we go through that?
Mhm. Oh, I definitely think so. And like these stories happen to zigzag back and forth between the US and Ireland. However, I think every book event I've done, just this fall, I was at the Boston Book Festival, and there was a group of authors. There was a bunch of us around the table, raising hell and giggling and laughing and carrying on. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Um, and we were from all different backgrounds, cultures. Some people were born in America, some people weren't. It was quite the party. Um, and one author said to me, it's not just an inter-country thing. Like I had to move from wherever to New York. It took me so long to get used to being in a city that size. And then it was an interesting conversation actually, because then we got onto that other topic about even if you haven't moved, do you feel at home? Where is home? What's the definition of home? Again, going back to Josephine Hart, she says we search for it all our lives. We search for that geography of the soul and that home. We spend our lives kind of searching for it. So, I remember one author around the table saying, you shouldn't assume that if you never moved from the town you were born in, that you still feel at home there. That home is about more than, four walls of a house or a certain street or a certain geography. And we had a wonderful conversation about this topic. And I think some people are born in, XYZ town and they're at home and they feel, spiritually at home there, spiritually, for want of a better word. And then others, do not. And I think it's something we kind of struggle for, all our lives, or we're lucky and we find home early in life and we know it the trick is to know it when you feel it.
Mm.
That's kind of the trick.
That's the trick. So I've never, I've only lived in the Chicagoland area. When I became an adult, I was like, I'm moving out of Chicago. I moved into the suburbs because I didn't like all the people, right?
Hmm.
But I've been fortunate enough to visit 42 out of the 50 states
Wow.
in the US. And then I probably have been to 10 different places. I've been to Africa. I'm heading to Australia in 2026. Um, and it's nothing, no matter, I love having my passport and going somewhere, but it's something about being back home that kind of warms my heart. And my aunt made a statement to me. She said, during the pandemic, something hit me about something you said 15 years later, prior to that, which was I said, I wanted to make my home so that everything I needed was here.
Hmm.
And if something ever happened that we couldn't leave the house, I would have everything I needed at home, from the aesthetics to, just everything. And
Mm.
she said, here comes the pandemic, and everybody is doing all these different projects at home. And you're just at home relaxing and reading. I said, because it was very important to me early on to have that level of stability,
Hmm.
to have a place that every time I walked in, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And what would I do if I ever moved?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I love being here.
That's great. And that's something to be. Well, you sound really grateful, but it is something that's magical when it happens. I'm a great walker too, and when I walk down to the water here, I feel at home, and I'm watching the birds and I'm watching the ducks, and there's just a feeling of it's where the river meets the ocean, and I think it's that junction. And there's a very rich history here in the Merrimack Valley of female factory workers, migration. They came specifically to work in the factories, and sometimes it's not my national history, but I feel that history because it all happened along that river. And they had the massive labor strike. I forget the year now, and they won. These women won the labor strike, a nationally known labor star. So I feel, I honestly can say when I walk along the river on my way to a coffee shop or the library or one of my little stops, I think it's the river make, kind of border. It literally feels like a set of arms around me. And I do feel the history. I never not feel the history of it, even though it's really an adopted history in my case.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
so funny you mentioned the being like kind of like being at home, like in the river. So every day I go to water aerobics in the morning. And when I'm in the pool, I also feel at home there as well. I'm in my zone, and people have even
Mhm.
commented, "You come here, you're like so happy." And I said, "I'm literally in this water fighting for my life." And this lady said, What do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, number one, I'm at peace when I'm in this water. So I'm helping my mental health, right? But emotionally and physically, I feel great being in the water. And so for those 50 minutes Monday through Friday, I love it. And when I don't go,
Mm,
I feel something different the
mm.
whole day.
A whole week, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very true. And I often wonder too if we wanted to get really go out on a ledge, like did we inherit something or did an ancestor, grow up by a river that we were never told about? Or I don't know why I always like to be by the water, but I do. It's why I moved from upstate New York to Massachusetts. And you just wonder, is that ancestral or what is it?
Well, that's a good question, and one of the things I've joked about with my family, my grandfather was born in 1920, right? So he died in 2025, and as the years went on, I started to learn more about my grandfather, subsequently my aunts and uncles, but I think there was a lot of history
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't learn about,
Mm.
and I wish we would have. And so I'll just give you a perfect example and then we'll move on before we run out of time because I got to talk about confrontation next. But as I was preparing a video for my grandfather's memorial service, I started going through pictures, some of which were from 1920, 1930. You could
Wow.
tell, how the photos were, um, the shape that they were in. But it's almost like through looking at those photos, I got to know him as the man versus being my grandfather. But
Mm.
then I also learned so much about my grandmother who had died 7 years before him, all because of these photos. I allowed myself to go on this journey of their life through
Wow.
photos.
Mm.
But now I'm like, I got all these questions and they're not here to
They're not
answer
in.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Don't you regret what we didn't ask our grandparents?
yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you know what? There are things we didn't ask, but there are also things that they told us
Oh yeah.
that we didn't understand then, but they're
Yeah.
clear today.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
so clear.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about confrontation because in the book, many of the characters are kind of forced into some type of confrontation. Why was it important for these situations to happen at those moments in their lives?
Well, I think if you take, I think one of the more contentious stories, and it's also got an adult. I have three teenage characters, and I don't know why, because I don't have any children, so I'm not around teens. But this is an adult character, and she lives in Massachusetts. She's married to an American. Life has gone on. She's very estranged from her father in Ireland. For over 20 years, she's estranged from him. And as the story goes on, you learn why. Her mom died when she was young. He's a fairly brutish character, and that's putting it mildly. But then he has a heart attack, and she's called home. And will I take care of somebody from whom I'm estranged and who has not been very kind to me, or will I not? So she does. And the story becomes about that dilemma for people who are estranged. But it's the one story in where I became very bold about being more bilingual and more about language almost as a mirror for the estrangement between them, because she starts using language as a weapon. She refuses to speak his native Irish. She speaks Americanized English. And language becomes a weapon and even one more bone of contention between this father and daughter. And I think, could that have happened when she was younger and when he was being actually pretty cruel to her? And before she had left and built up her own business outside Boston and had a whole American life. I don't think so. I think because she had built up this adult life and now she rushes home to regress into the same level of ire and push and pull as she knew as a child. I think that's what brings out the bitterness in the story and this nastiness between them. So, also, like when you're writing fiction, you think you can write it as, oh, this poor woman was called home to take care of her dad. But then you realize, no, that doesn't work. You have to have a plot of some sort, right? I mean, Netflix would be out of business right now if there weren't a plot. There has to be a
Yes.
plot. So in writing some of the stories and in rewriting, the earlier version of them, you have to pull the two characters even further apart, because what this character wants has to be very different from what this character wants. So sometimes it's kind of the contentiousness between characters is a plot. I'll be honest, it's a plot device. But I'm also like, I think two or three of the stories with, again, female characters are about how we delude ourselves, and that's based. I
Mhm.
looked at my own self delusions when I was younger. You're in a relationship, a young relationship, and you think, oh, this is the love of my life. But in fact, for him, it was quite casual. And you're quite disposable. Or we've even had friends, girlfriends we thought were girlfriends. And no, you're actually, again, quite disposable. Um,
Mhm.
I became fascinated in the kind of when the main character is the clueless person. They've told themselves this story, this fairy tale, this lie, and the story is how far they'll push that self delusion.
Mm.
I
Mm.
became kind of fascinated by that, and they're unaware of their own flaws, and they're unaware of just what happened in the past, and I can ignore it. I can push it into the past, and I'm just doing my thing, and it becomes not true, but they will not admit that.
Mm. The stories we tell ourselves.
I know.
So I have enough. We have about 8 more minutes left, but I have to ask this question. So if you think about the word trespasser, I'll just use myself at home. A trespasser would be somebody who's on my property
Hmm.
and, they're not supposed to be. But in the book, it's almost like the trespassers, you're suggesting that there are some boundaries, like emotional boundaries, relational boundaries, cultural boundaries. Um, how does crossing those boundaries change the characters for better or for worse?
That's a great question. I think, the title story of Trespassers was it was inspired by a trip to Cape Cod where somebody told me to get off their beach.
Say the Cape, because that's what everybody else
Cape.
says. I'm going
Yeah,
to the Cape.
Cape. That's right. Um, and it was inspired by being on this beautiful, gorgeous beach, and I was just taking a walk. I wasn't committing any crime. I wasn't doing anything egregious. And somebody quite rudely reminded me that the condos owned the beach. And so, of course, me being me, I looked it up. And in fact, Massachusetts and Maine, but particularly Massachusetts, has the most restrictive owner friendly laws in the country
Mm.
about who owns the intertidal zone between high tide and low tide and who owns the water, even the seawater in that
Water?
zone. Yes. Looked it up, Lisa. I looked it up. And I do love legal things. For some reason, I love reading through dry legal statutes. Um, And it ours here in Massachusetts is the most restrictive, and it leans in favor of the property owner at all times. There are three exceptions which come from colonial era. If you're fishing, swimming, or for navigation, you can be in the intertidal zone as a stranger, an outsider, a non-property owner. So I became quite fascinated by that. And that's kind of the topic of the title story of Trespassers. A young couple are trespassing on this older couple's private beach. And I mean, it's funny because in other US states, apparently in Hawaii, where I've never been, there's no such thing as a private beach.
Mm.
I've been in Barbados. There's no private beaches.
Bro, I love
Anybody
Barbados.
can walk on the beach. But so and it became a kind of a symbol then for the characters. It's an older couple. It's her ancestral summer home, her summer vacation home. It's been handed down through generations in her quite wealthy New England family.
Quite wealthy.
Quite wealthy, yeah. If you can own an antique home and your own beach and you only use it in the summertime, that bespeaks wealth to me.
Yes.
Perhaps I'm wrong. I'm open to being wrong, but so it's in that instance the trespassing issue and the wrong person criminally being on the beach is sort of a symbol for what's happening with the couple because he's of a lower social class. And I love to write about social class because often I think that's the word we don't address in the US sometimes. We don't want to talk social class. So it kind of becomes a symbol for that of who's on the wrong side of this fortune of owning an antique house handed down through generations on your private beach. And it's the husband, because he's from a lower social class. And even after 52 years of marriage, that interclass in my story, I don't, is still playing out. So for that poor husband, what he does is he lies to the wife all the time. Did you see anybody at the beach? I'm going to call the police. And he says, no, I didn't see anybody.
Wasn't me.
Wasn't me. And he's seen trespassers galore on the beach, but he sides with his own social class, if you will. And that's kind of a simplification of the story. But there's another story about where a woman is in quite an emotionally abusive marriage, and again, it's about beach, and it's about kind of who owns what. And she's an immigrant, and he's not. He's from the United States, but he loves to use his money as a weapon. So that story plays out in the same way. She wins in the end, though. That character wins in the end. So she sort of recoups the place that she was being denied through his emotional abuse and his waving his flashing his cash around.
Mm-hmm.
So I think looking back on it, these were issues that I was mulling over in my brain, and then they came out via a story.
They came to life.
Yeah.
So before we leave, there's one more thing I want to talk about. So one of the themes is about loss and grief, right? That's kind of interwoven into the story, to the collection. What do you hope readers ultimately take away about reconciliation, both with others, with yourself, after they get through these? I think it was 11 stories, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Nobody has asked me that till now. I think I'd like them to. So, if there were reader A somewhere out there in the stratosphere, after we're done here, and that reader is going through the 11 stories, I think I'd like them to take away that, kind of that doing the wrong thing, being unkind, being a jerk. Can I use that word?
Yes.
Has
Yes.
consequences, and it can have consequences 50 years after you've neglected to treasure somebody or treat your wife with respect, or you've been emotionally abusive or physically abusive to your child. That isn't something you can push the off button on. That it has a certain trickle down consequence. And I think in this era, we all need to kind of become a little more aware of the consequences of our actions, not just tomorrow or next week, but in the longer term. And then, being the little, the little rebel that I am, I do love to write about social class and about, we can't we can't just make the laws just for ourselves. We can't sort of say, well, I'm so so, so therefore. Um, and I think, having been a food server in my life, you really learn that. You learn that when people abuse their power, their financial power or their whatever power, geographic power, their social class, that has consequences too. And it's not that I wanted any of the characters to get their comeuppance, but at the same time, I think for the reader takeaway, it would be about that all of our actions can have a real trickle down effect, and we never know how it's registering for the person on the end person on the end of that behavior, the
Mm-hmm.
victim of that behavior. We don't know how it's registering. So uh, I think the takeaway is try and be a better person.
Yes. And I like to say a better person, but be more of an emotionally intelligent person where you not only be your own emotional boss, but also that you acknowledge and respect the emotions of others.
Exactly.
And you can't do that unless you um, forge some type of relationship with the person, right? Not too deep, but just more of an understanding, like listening versus judging. Relationships can be healthier. But I think some people have historically challenging relationships, and they carry them from decade to decade, never releasing them.
Hmm.
And they're
Yeah.
holding on to it and they hurt others.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm not a psychologist, but I think
Me either.
they would agree with us there. I worked in mental health and behavioral health for long enough that I think that would echo much of what I heard from my clinical colleagues who were wonderful to work with. That things have consequences and it trickles down, and you don't know 3 days later how that person is feeling because of your behavior
Mm.
or what message you accidentally gave them about themselves. You know, so yeah, I think that would be the takeaway message. It's a little bit of a highfalutin message, but still,
That's okay.
you know.
So, before we go, can you tell our listening, viewing audience how they can find you, how they can find the book?
Well, I have an author website, and it's my name. It's AineGreaney.com. So it's AINEGREANEY.com. But I think anybody who would kind of look at Irish author north of Boston, I'd probably pop up, I hope. And then I was very fortunate to have a small regional publisher called Sea Crow Press. They're actually headquartered on the Cape. Shocker. And so, the book is available there, and then at that other retail that we shall not mention,
Shall not mention.
shall not mention. Um, and if anybody wanted to buy the book, I have these little author plates that I can sign it for them and mail it to them within the U.S. Because mailing abroad has now become quite tricky,
Quite tricky. It's been quite become quite the conundrum.
hasn't it? Yeah, my family back home, my sisters and my nieces, they it's almost a burden on them when you mail them like a little gift or a hat or a scarf or whatever.
Yeah, I'm like, email me.
Yeah.
Don't
Yes.
physically mail me anything.
Yeah.
Email me if it's gonna come from out of the country. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
It's now become more of a burden than a gift. It used to be a lovely gift, and they loved getting gifts from America, but now it's like a burden.
Yes,
But
yes.
yeah, so I'm online. I have an author page, and I think that's the easiest way to find me. Just by a website, and I'm contactable on the website. There's a contact page or whatever. I love hearing from students and people who attended events. Or just this morning, I was at a coffee, and this woman recognized me from I'd say it's a good 4 or 5 years. She was in one of my workshops, and I remembered what she wrote. I always remember what they wrote. So I must have one of those faces.
And you left her with the memory, so that was also probably
Yeah,
why.
yeah.
And I wholeheartedly believe that when you show up as your true authentic self, people will remember you.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't
It's
thought of that, to be honest, but yeah, she instantly recognized me, and then she was a little taken aback because I said, "Oh yes, you wrote the piece about blah blah," and yeah,
See, memorable.
yeah,
And this isn't the only book that you've written. You have some
no,
fiction and nonfiction books. And so I hope that through this conversation that our listening viewing audience is intrigued enough to buy the book and explore more about your creative mind and the stories you tell. For me, I feel like reading takes me away from my life
mhm,
and positions me somewhere else.
mhm,
If not, but for 12 chapters, right?
right,
But it also, I'm the person who's writing and highlighting. I'm like, oh, that sounds good. Let me highlight that. And a lot of times, because I typically mostly have physical books, so I can go back and pull them off the shelf and open them up and think like, when I highlighted this, and I also don't judge me, but I write the date in my book when I read the book. And so I often think about how was I feeling at the time when I highlighted that note? What was I going through in life and how has that changed
interesting.
to
Oh,
today?
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of nerdy.
yeah. Because we are different, aren't we? We are like we're different readers. We evolve as readers over time,
Mhm.
and I found during our pandemic, I read differently. I read different
You
types of
read
books.
different? Did you read the spicy novels?
No, I didn't know, but I was having, like many of us, I was having trouble sleeping.
Mm.
We were anxious, and it was a hard time for all of us, and much harder for others than for me. But um, I found I switched, how I read, and I switched, I think, how I wrote as well. Like we evolve with time, like you say, Lisa. It's like, what was I thinking back then? Why did I love that book when I was 30, but now or the opposite? Why do I love it now and I left it aside when I was 30? There's no figuring that out, really. You know,
Yeah,
just
I read some when I was younger, and then we really have to go because we're way over time. But
oh, sorry.
I want to say I read when I was younger. I mean, I probably was 11 or 12, 10 or 11, 12. I was reading books like Flowers in the Attic, Petals in the Wind, Let There Be Thorns. I mean, my mother must have had these books, but I developed a love for reading very early on, primarily because I was told that I wasn't comprehending what I'm reading. But since then have graduated from college, I must be able to comprehend something. But I developed that love for really digging into reading, and I think there are so many different tips and tricks and wisdom that you need to know about life and yourself that are embedded in books. And if you
Yes.
allow
Mm.
yourself to
Yeah.
go through the journey, it's
Yeah.
something on the other side that's
Yeah.
waiting.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
All right, everyone. Well, I just finished chatting with Áine Greaney, author of Trespassers and Other Stories. And until next week, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you so much for this interview. I really loved it, Dr. Campbell. It was just lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. You've just experienced another conversation from 52 Authors, 52 Weeks, Season 3. The conversation may pause here, but the growth continues. I'm Dr. Lisa L. Campbell, the Growth Motivator, and I'll see you next week.